Hey everyone, so One Piece chapter 1099 just came out, and the best backstory in One Piece continues. While we had no major dramatic moments this chapter, not like the last one, we did get a lot of answers to a lot of questions this chapter. I feel like this was the chapter that really put together a lot of the pieces and question marks regarding Kuma's history, his connection with Vegapunk, and how Bonnie's situation came to be what it is today. So, it seems as though, based on the ending of the chapter, because that's the really interesting part, the way it went is Kuma makes the deal with Vegapunk to be able to cure Bonnie, and in return, Kuma's just gonna offer some of his DNA to help create the Pacifistas. Kuma does this only because he's under the impression that he gets from Vegapunk that the Pacifistas will be used as a sort of tool for good or peacekeeping throughout the world. Of course, as we know, the term pacifista throughout One Piece, while it does come from the root word pacifist, that name is kind of ironic, as we've seen that it's been used pretty much exclusively for warfare and destruction and murder, as going all the way back to Sabaody and obviously continuing into the modern day. So, that aside, Kuma probably should have known a bit better, but in the moment, I suppose we can excuse it, as Vegapunk seems like a trustworthy individual. I guess Kuma would have good reason to believe that Vegapunk, as such an important member of the world government, would have some level of influence over how the Pacifista are used in the future, and it is also a very emotional period of time for Kuma, so he's maybe not thinking straight. Maybe I'm just trying to make too many excuses for him there, but at the end of the day, you know, if it wasn't Kuma who provided his DNA for the Pacifista would have been made one way or another. Maybe they wouldn't have been so big and strong and bulky, thanks to Kuma's DNA, but Vegapunk would have found a way to make do. I mean, just look at the Seraphim nowadays. It's not just, you know, if it's Vegapunk, it's the world government, they've got resources. At the end of the day, if they want to make powerful weapons of mass destruction, they're going to be able to. So, not trying to purely excuse Kuma there, but look, he's going through a lot right now. He's going through a lot. So, Kuma makes that deal, but who's waiting? Who's lurking? Who's got their own agenda here? It's Gorosei Saturn. I would assume that what we're going to be seeing next chapter would be the reveal that Gorosei Saturn interferes and decides that no, you don't just get this nice, easy breezy deal of basically trading in, you know, just some of your DNA for your daughter being cured. You are going to be a slave and lab experiment yourself. I would assume that that is Gorosei Saturn's influence, because at the moment, Vegapunk seems like he's, you know, a very nice, accommodating person who's offering a nice deal to Kuma, and Kuma obviously is going to go along with it. It seems like they are on the same wavelength, and they're both good people. You know, Vegapunk, as far as we can tell, is a good person. I don't think he's manipulating Kuma here. So I think ultimately the hand of evil that comes in and twists this whole situation into something much worse is Gorosei Saturn. I think that that is very, very, very fitting for the arc that we're in right now, Egghead, because it allows Saturn to basically play this sort of villainous role throughout Kuma's life, and it allows things to come to a head and reach some sort of a climax or conclusion to the story of Kuma at Egghead Island itself, because this is not the first time that Saturn and Kuma have been at odds. Saturn was the person that, he was the celestial dragon that confronted Kuma at God Valley when Kuma first picked up the paw fruit, and Saturn was the one that stood in his way. Saturn was the first person that Kuma was really able to speak to as a celestial dragon from the perspective of a slave to a celestial dragon, and articulate for the first time his beliefs and his philosophy that the celestial dragons, in Kuma's view, are no more important than anybody else, no more important than the slaves, and from there on, Kuma goes on to become the type of person who tries to save everybody he possibly can, starting with saving all of these slaves at God Valley right under Saturn's nose. So that's kind of the starting moment of Kuma's journey as to becoming a hero. That began with Saturn as kind of his antagonist that he went up against. And this moment of seeming tragedy, where Saturn will come back into Kuma's life to essentially tear him down from a king down to a slave, a mindless cyborg, an obedient servant of the world government to essentially punish him. It seems like Saturn is back to be the major antagonist, the major villain of Kuma's life, to basically ruin everything that he has and turn him into what he becomes. But at the same time, it seems like we get the final resolution to that in some sense, and that Kuma is finally going to get back to Egghead and most likely be able to confront Saturn in one final way, either taking on Saturn himself or most likely reviving Luffy to be able to defeat Saturn, as Kuma always hoped for as a boy, thereby sort of bringing Kuma's whole story full circle. And Saturn plays this nice role at the beginning, at the pivotal moment of tragedy, and then finally at the end, the conclusion, the climax. I think that that works out perfectly. I like that Oda took aside one Gorosei to sort of be this overarching villainous figure in this narrative arc, both in terms of the Egghead Island arc, but just in terms of the story, the saga of Bartholomew Kuma in general. So big props to that. I think Saturn by the end of this is going to be one of the most hated villains in One Piece in general, but I just really like the way that Oda has woven in just one of the Gorosei who up till now were all basically a generally homogenous group, with none of them really standing out from one another. But I really like the fact that at this point in the story, with Imu and the Gorosei becoming so prominent and important, Oda's going out of his way to make sure that, no, these are all very distinct individual figures that all need to be defeated, and they all come with their own baggage, their own cruelty, their own brand of world government injustice, as you might say. So I love that. I love what the Gorosei are shaping up to be, and Saturn as the first one is obviously going to make for a very memorable villain. So that aside, some of the other things that we got filled in, aside from the Pacifista and the Vegapunk connection, was how Kuma came to find out about Vegapunk in the first place, which is thanks to Dragon. So Dragon finally made an appearance. I think that Dragon, a controversial figure at this point in time. I would strongly encourage people who have a negative view of Dragon at the moment to go back and look at my most recent video on Dragon. I feel like it is a very, very thorough breakdown of a perspective on Dragon that I think many people are not realizing. I feel like he is one of probably the most doubted and misunderstood characters in the story so far, simply because he doesn't take certain actions that we would expect many of the great leaders throughout One Piece to do. But I think what readers are forgetting is everything that Dragon has been working for and everything that he has been doing that no other character in One Piece has been doing. So I think that a very underappreciated character got a nice little scene this chapter where he does actually feel a little bit more human and a little bit more connected, and kind of a little bit more friendly and likable than we've generally seen him. He's not exactly making plans to go save his subordinates in this chapter either, but it's clear that he is aware of the way that things are, and he is trying to help out Kuma a little bit, giving him some advice on how he could help Bonnie. But at the same time, the man has bigger plans, and things are not going to be swayed here or there, whether or not someone's in Impel Down, whether or not someone's trapped in Marijua, whatever it may be. There's also one little tidbit that many people picked up on, which is Dragon talking about, the winds of fate directing you. It is very, very likely at this point that Dragon has a wind-related devil fruit. I kind of hope it's the Wind Logia and not a Wind Zoan like many people have been talking about, just because I feel like we've got so many mythical Zoans at this point. They're all cool. I love the idea. I love the fact that they're becoming so much more significant in the story, but we still don't have a Wind Logia. I think it would be cool just for one character to finally have a Logia again, because at one point in time, Logias were really the cool thing in One Piece that we were all excited about, and now mythical Zoans have kind of become the shiny new toy. So I'd love for one of the last significant figures in the story, Dragon, to once again be a Logia figure, just to kind of change things up, and a throwback to the olden days where we'd get so excited when we found out an admiral had a Logia. But you know what? If this is some crazy wind-related mythical Zoan, I'm sure it will be cool as well. I'm just kind of like, okay, if Dragon's not the Wind Logia, then who is the Wind Logia at this point? Is there even one in existence? And other little holes that we got filled in was the story of Connie, the Dowager Queen, and I see a little bit of a comparison here with us learning that, King Bekari is a terrible king, but the king before him was actually a really good guy, because it's a callback to me of how the story of Drum Kingdom revolved around this evil king, Wapol, but his father was a very loved and respected king, and all it takes is one bad generation for all of that goodwill to go away. I feel like Kuma is almost a Dalton-like figure in that sense, the guy that became king once people got fed up with the previous administration, if that makes sense, but everybody loved the royal family before the new generation, Bekari, Wapol, whoever it was, came into power, and it's just that once that new generation came into power, they had to be taken down, abolished, rebelled against, and so in the same sense that Dalton, just through fighting back against Wapol and becoming the new hero of the people, they just unanimously made him king even though he didn't want to be one, and he didn't even live in the castle if I recall correctly. Same thing with Kuma right here, which is the people of Sorbet Kingdom. They saw Kuma rebel and free them from the new regime, and then they just unanimously named Kuma the new king, even though he didn't want to be, and he kind of just never even lived in the castle afterwards. So I see some similarities between the story of Drum Kingdom and the story of Sorbet Kingdom. Intentional or not, at this point One Piece is 1100 chapters long, so there's gonna be just some coincidences, deliberate or not, that happen to come up over the course of time. But I just felt like that was interesting and similar. I would not have expected the previous generation before Bekari to have been actually a good ruling class. And to me, it remains a mystery how Bonnie was able to eat her her fruit because Bonnie stays indoors all the time. I saw some people suggesting that as a baby, Bonnie was force-fed a devil fruit. That would not be strange to me as far as, what we know of the Celestial Dragons and what they're capable of doing, but it is odd that the ability just never popped up till this point in time, and I think it was a little unclear as to, how old Bonnie was when she and Ginny first left Marie-Joie. I think that, at a certain age, could a baby even eat a fruit? I don't know, but it remains a mystery because there's no way that she could have really gotten outside, so it must have been somehow slipped in or something that she was fed as a baby at this point. It really, really is hard to tell, but she has the fruit. She had the fruit for a long time, and yeah, we finally got that little bit understood. It does still leave the question as to why Akainu and the world government was so bent on making sure that Bonnie did not escape. I wonder if that is at this point confirmed to have nothing to do with her fruit. Her fruit is just a random fruit, and instead it's everything to do with her relationship with Kuma. Maybe Bonnie being used as leverage. As I talked about in a much earlier video, the real reason that Kuma allowed his mind to be erased, I talked about how Bonnie was probably being used as leverage to make sure that Kuma remained obedient to the Celestial Dragons. So I wonder if that's something that's going to be revealed next chapter. And finally, I want to talk about the voice of the people, 2 submissions from my top tier of patrons. So Justin Holland said, everything is becoming connected. Question is, did Kuma somehow predict Luffy being the next Joy Boy? That is a really interesting question because Kuma knows next to nothing about Luffy, and he only really had one interaction, the Thriller Bark interaction, and Luffy was unconscious for that. With the Straw Hat crew, at least, he got to learn a little bit about the type of friends that Luffy kept. But then Sabaody, he really didn't get to see much of Luffy. He understood what Luffy did, which was punch a Celestial Dragon. But ultimately, I don't think that there was much for Kuma to have gone off to think that this kid could be the next Joy Boy. I don't know, or at the very least, we don't know how much Kuma knows about the story of Joy Boy, but whether or not he thought that this kid could be the next incarnation of Nika, could eat the Nika fruit. A lot of how much Kuma, the Revolutionary Army, etc. are in general aware of this history and this lore is left up in the air, but I hopefully we get a little bit more clarification on that at some point soon. But at the same time, I think it would be cool if Kuma is not fully aware what Luffy is or anything like that. He just realizes that there is something special about this kid, the way that this kid has risen through the world, something that he recognized even pre-time skip, and also with the understanding that this is the son of Dragon, the man that Kuma probably respects the most in the world. So a lot of those factors may have just made Kuma believe that whatever it may be, the winds of fate, just a gut instinct feeling, it is important to save this kid and his friends, and it will pay dividends in the future. And that's why I think it'd be so powerful if in Kuma's last moments, should he be about to die, he gets to see the fruits of what his efforts were pre-time skip, right? The fruits of his final decisions to decide to save Luffy, the Straw Hat crew, to look out for them, getting to see in his final moments Luffy emerging as Nika, the individual that Kuma prayed for so long as a kid. It would be basically validating his entire life and what he's fought for and believed in for his entire life. So I really, really hope that Kuma does get to see that. And maybe next chapter, in the next couple of chapters, we get a bit more insight into why Kuma chose Luffy specifically. But if we don't, it's just going to be chalked up to basically a good intuition and gut instinct. Braxton Hart said, also, when does Kizaru come into the picture here? Vegapunk mentioned needing a laser model for the design. So that's a really interesting question for me, because I think that there's tremendous potential, as I've talked about in earlier videos, for Kizaru's character in this arc. And so far, we only really got, some brief snippets of Kizaru's relationship with Vegapunk and Sentomaru, but if they're characters that they're going to be working with in tandem to create this pacifista model, and remember, Kizaru even mentions that he knows Bonnie and considers Bonnie an old friend, that suggests that Kuma, Kizaru, Sentomaru, and Bonnie, they're all going to be working with Vegapunk on the island at the same time. So I don't know if the flashback wraps up that quickly next chapter or not, or if we actually get a little bit of, character dynamics and character interactions and maybe a bit of a relationship that we get to see develop between Kizaru, Kuma, Bonnie, Sentomaru, and Vegapunk. I think that would be extremely interesting, and just getting a little bit more background and setup for Kizaru, I think that could be really, really valuable for him potentially having a significant character moment before all is said and done at Egghead Island. So I'm glad you brought that up. I hope we get a little bit of Kizaru next chapter, and not just in a quickly skim through, just show him once or twice kind of way, but maybe a couple of interesting interactions between him and Kuma and Vegapunk. So that's all for this video, and I hope you all enjoyed the chapter, and I will talk to you all next week.